Hey everybody, welcome back to Magic Mind. You are here, my friends, because you know that magic is an art form with the ability to move and entertain people like no other. But you know that developing this skill requires diligent practice and a detailed understanding of the craft. So my goal with this show and company is to provide you with the community to introduce you to the people and ideas that will help you develop your magic. My name is Christoph, and our guest today is Peter Turner. Guys, this is incredible. He first got into magic at 4 years old, but unlike many of us who started out with a magic kit, he couldn't afford books or products, leaving him with no other option than to create effects for himself. He was only 2 years later, at age 6, that he had his first performance. In fact, as a young adult, he was so poor that he worked 3 jobs, lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in the projects, and would run an extension cord from his neighbor house just to have electricity, because otherwise it was too expensive. Despite all of that, now listen close, because this is important to me. He is where he is today because he worked. If you think that Peter Turner is better than you, it's because he has put in more hours than you. Now, I tend to call everyone who comes on this show living legends, because they genuinely are to me. But with Pete, he becomes more and more of a legend with every performance he gives and every person he meets. Now, based on where he came from, we know that he wasn't just born into the Lucky Sperm Club. He worked to get to where he is today, making him not only a legend, but a self-made legend. Peter represents a new era of mentalism brought about by his unique perspective that took the community by storm, based on the idea that it's easier to use linguistic acrobatics than it is sleight of hand to give his spectators an unforgettable experience. He's well known for his storytelling because his stories are scripted in a way that is designed to create as much of a connection with the audience as possible. And to see an example of this, one mustn't look far beyond Isabella Star 2. His linguistic acrobatics and world-class storytelling culminate to an experience for his audience that is unique to him, and I believe to be the purest form of mentalism that I've ever seen. In the interview that I had with Dan Harlan, Dan called Peter the best in the world when it came to propless mentalism. Despite his fame in the magic community for being a leader in the rise of propless mentalism, he is well versed in all forms of mentalism and equipped to use the right tool for the job, so to speak. I'm so grateful to have him on the show, someone who I've followed for a very long time, none other than Pete Turner. Thank you for the show.
Thank you for having me, Christoph. You did a better introduction than I could have ever done, and you know more about me than me. It's incredible.
Well, I put in the work. That's a big theme of this show, is if you want to get good, put in the work. So I know all of this because I watched every interview that you've ever done. I read every article on you that's ever been on the internet or is on the internet. So there you go.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. And I have one question, because I think your scripting is great, and I've watched a few of the shows, and I always think to myself, well, the introductions are so well put together, and the research is obviously clearly there. Are you a and I know you're supposed to be interviewing me, but are you a practitioner of an NLP?
I'm not, no.
No, there's a really cool line that you use in your introduction. I don't know if it's constructed and put in there on purpose, but there's a line that says, "You like me," and I think it's a very clever line, because Richard Bandler put that line into whatever he did to make sure his audience, or supposedly, I mean, I couldn't say if it works or not, but "You like me." Gets the audience to subconsciously weigh onto liking you without ever knowing you have. And I thought it's such a clever line, and I've listened to it a few times, and every single time I listen to it, I like you a little bit more.
Well, the truth is, I'm not a practitioner of NLP, but you're right, that is on purpose, and I don't think I've ever said that out loud, but there you go.
Yeah, I just didn't know if anybody else had ever picked up on it. I mean, I really thought it was well constructed. So yeah, the introduction were great.
Well, thank you very much. The truth is, this show is based on another show called Impact Theory, hosted by a man named Tom Bilyeu, who built a billion-dollar brand in the health industry and now has moved on to this new project called Impact Theory that focuses on the mind. And this show is very much inspired by that. And the phrase magic mind goes beyond magic and mentalism. To me, someone with a magic mind is someone who has mastery over their mind, someone who uses their mind in magical ways, and to me that doesn't necessarily mean magic or mentalism, something beyond that.
Yeah, of course. I think for anything to be incredible, you've got to apply Philip Larkin's rule of thirds. I don't know if you know Philip Larkin, or you've heard his rule of thirds. No matter what it is that you do in life, there's 3 rules to being successful, and 3 rules to being great at what you do. And the first rule is it believable? And the second rule is, do people care? And the third rule is, do people still care? which I think is a really important set of rules, because firstly, is what you're selling or is what you're doing believable? And that's what I really love about, you know, that you talked about the guy that created $1 million brand in the health industry, and anybody having that mind magic. I think the first thing is that it doesn't matter what it is that you're doing, if you're going to be successful in any field, the things that you've got to portray and the things that you've got to do have got to be believable, because if not, you come across as a hack.
Sure.
And the second thing is, do people care? Now, obviously, it would be in the health industry or even this community, is people have a care for it. You find your niche, you find your audience. And the third rule, I think, is the most important rule of all, is, do people still care? And that's after they've left and they've come out of the experience and they've gone somewhere else. Do they still care about what it is that they witnessed? Is it something that they're going to remember? Have they received a gift that you've given that keeps giving? And so I know it's a random tangent and it might seem so out of place, but for anybody that understands what it is that I'm saying there, I think there's the biggest piece of advice anybody could give in those three rules. And I think that's why this show is going to be successful, and I think that's why the guy who made $1 million brand from the health industry is also successful.
Well, thank you, Peter. And there's something that you said there at the very beginning of the three parts. The first one was coming across as a hack or a phony, and I think that's more true now than ever with the internet. We're all so connected that if there's something that you're hiding, it's going to be exposed and you're going to go down with that dirty secret. So it's important to be as honest and truthful as at all times now, because you never know who's watching.
Yeah, that's it. And I think as well, you know, like you say, because there's such a wide web of people that are intertwined, your lies catch up with you eventually.
Sure.
The one thing that you said in the introduction I want to correct, whilst we're on the subject of it, it's not a lie, it's just a missed piece of information. I actually got into magic when I just turned 5, so I was 4 going 5. Now, my interest in magic, and at the time, obviously, I wasn't compos mentis enough to be able to create anything that were of substance. And it wasn't really until Christmas Eve that same year that I decided that I was going to be a magician. So, if you don't mind, I'll explain for the people that don't know how I got into magic and how it came about.
Sure.
Now, a lot of people don't know this, but I never had any parents. I grew up with my nan, my grandma. I had a mum and I had a dad. They're not passed away. But what happened is, when I was about 2 or 3 years old, my parents split up, and my dad, he moved off, and we'd see my dad infrequently. And then my mum, I don't know whether it hit her hard or whatever, and I'm not going to get into the personal side of it because I couldn't ever tell you what went on in her head. Like I said, I was just a kid at the time. But it was Christmas Eve, and she knocked on my nan's door, and she said, "You best take the kids." And my nan said, "If you leave, you don't come back." And this was, obviously my nan wasn't expecting us to be there over Christmas. And my mum said, "See you later," and she just left us on my nan's doorstep. And then Christmas Day, my nan knew that I had this interest in magic, and my gran hates magic. It's like, everybody has that one thing that they dislike. For me, it's painting or painting walls or washing up. I hate it. But for her, it's magic. She despises it more than anything else. And I think she felt that bad for us. She even let me watch Lance Burton on the television. So I watched Lance Burton's Dublin Kane act, and I was sat there in front of the TV, and I was absolutely mesmerised. And I realised at that moment, and I know that I was so young, I just made a decision, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And that's it. And from that moment, I think it's the only thing that's stayed consistent throughout my entire life. So that's how I got into it. It were more 5, and then 6 I did, it was a christening that I did. And at the time, this is where, again, there's a bit of a strange story, and I'm not going to get into the depths of it, but my mum had also told my dad that we moved to Scotland. So it wasn't for another year that I'd see my dad, because he believed that I was in Scotland. He was looking for me in Scotland, and all the time we were right round the corner underneath his nose. And we didn't have the internet back then, so it wasn't like you could just type on Facebook and say, "Have you seen this person? Do you know where this person is?" Back then it was all word of mouth, and he never heard about it. And then I'd see him every month, and I'd see him, one day a month or whatever. And it was actually my dad that got me the gig. He saw a couple of the routines, and he was like, "You're pretty good at this." And I could never afford decks of cards. I could never afford anything. My nan trying to bring me and my brother up. Her son Robert were living there. And we lived in it was a flat, so we call them flats in England, and there were 2 bedrooms, and there were me, my uncle, and which is my nan's son, and my brother in one room, and then my nan in the other room. And then a few months later, my sister was born, and my mum picked us all back up, and then dumped us all back off on my nan again. And then there were me, my brother, my uncle, my nan, and my sister, all living in a small 2 bedrooms flat, and it was in the ghetto, and it was such a small place. I mean, I went back there last year. I shot a documentary that I never aired, and I'm a bit of an obsessive freak when it comes to filming stuff. I just film everything now. I'm so inspired by the camera and seeing things behind, through the lens of a camera, that I filmed a documentary about a year ago where I actually managed to get access back into the flat that I grew up in. And I walked into the bathroom and I couldn't, I'd have to sit on the toilet seat now to close the door. It was that small. So
wow.
It's such a change. And then moving on from there, about 11 years old, I then started to visit Halifax. So my nan had taken me out to Halifax, and I was so obsessed with magic. I was trying to get into the local magic clubs, and of course at the time, it wasn't really, for somebody that had no card tricks, that didn't know any references, I owned a Collins coin book, and that were it, with a little Collins pocket coin book. And at school I'd been given a deck of cards by Mr. Buckle or Mr. Belt, showed Mr. Buckle, and there were a guy called Marshall Duffy that used to perform in the pubs, and I used to watch him, and whenever my auntie were in, she said, "Oh, that magician's in, do you want to come over and do you want to see him?" And I'd go and watch him. And by 11, without sounding egotistical, I was pretty good, because it was the only thing that I had. I had a strange set of friends. One that were obsessed with Freddy Krueger. Another friend that used to put wax crayons on the radiator and stick them up his nose and then eat them. So I had a weird small circle of friends. And I had a friend called Scott who played the guitar as well, but he moved away after a while. I did a couple of talent shows with him. And yeah, so I think that it was my entire life, and I had a lot of time to myself, and I, for whatever reason, whether I were a naughty kid, I don't know, but a number of times, it's going to sound very Harry Potter-esque, but I was locked into like a little cupboard, so I used to practice in there, and I used to always be timed out or whatever, so I just used to create magic tricks with the things that were around me. And I went down at a place called Peace Hall in Halifax, and I went, and there's a magic stall there, and I begged my nan, please let me just go see, please let me see. And I went over to the guy that were working there, a guy called Jonathan Allwood. And I'll get into Jonathan later, because Jonathan was one of my first inspirations in magic, and what happened to him was very tragic. He's still alive, but such a tragic situation. I'm still in contact with him now after years and years. But he showed me an effect, and I said, yeah, it's great, but what about doing it this way? And at 11 years old, I'd never seen the trick that he was showing me before, but I showed him a way to do it that streamlined the method and streamlined the presentation. And he got chatting to my nan, and he said to my nan, does he want a job? Does he want to come and work down here? So my nan said, do you think you'd be comfortable getting on the bus and coming down to Halifax? And I was like, yeah, of course I can do that. And we went to a charity shop. I bought a purple velvet jacket. I looked like Willy Wonka. And at Christmas time, they used to make me wear like Harry Potter triangle type hats on the top of my head. And it's Mark, I didn't know any better. I was 11 years old. But yeah, so I did that, and that were good. I got to practice and perform for hundreds of people that passed through the market. I was Svengali pitchman. I used to sell Svengali decks and magic props and hot rods. And I got paid at the time in videotapes and books. And that's when I realised that some of the things that I'd done over the last, 6-7 years had been invented.
Peter, looks like you cut out there.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, just give me 1 second. So, yeah, so most kids would be disappointed in that happening, and I wasn't discouraged at all. In fact, I thought to myself, wow, these guys have written books on the subject, and I'm on a similar wavelength to these people. And so it just encouraged me more to pursue what it is that I was doing. I used to, it's going to sound really sad, and I'm not bothered. I've got past thinking what people, I've got past thinking about what people's opinions are, or whatever. It's probably going to sound really corny, but I remember once holding on to a book, one of Andrew Mayne's books,
Yeah.
and I remember closing my eyes after reading it and imagined dreaming, like daydreaming, that somebody on the other side of the world one day would read a book that I'd written. And that were it. You know, each step of the way, I always said to myself, I'm going to do this, and if I'm going to do it, I'm going to go all in, and against all odds, and against everybody else, and all the people that didn't want to stand by me. You know, school were no good for me, so yeah. So against all of that, I think I prevailed. I mean, I'm doing all right. I've managed to build something from it, which is ultimately important.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's how I got into magic, and that's my right up to about 13, 14, and that's how I got into the magic side of stuff.
Well, you know what's cool is when you put out a product, and it doesn't happen all the time, but we know it's going to be very high quality. It seems like you sort of have this mentality. Magic and mentalism has always been there for you since a young boy, and it seems like you're treating it very well, the way it's kind of supported you over the years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the last product you put out was what, 2013, 14?
The last DVD set that I put out was 2014. That were on Real Time Performance. In between there, I tried a bit of an experimental project called the STEM System, but I don't really count that as a DVD. It is a DVD project. That was 2015, but I don't really count it as a DVD project per se, because it were on creating videos and whatever else. It wasn't really a real time performance type DVD.
Sure.
There is whilst you brought this up, and I think, you know, these interviews are a great place to express things of this nature. I think I've had one blemish out of my entire career, I think, and that was Dare to be Bold. And Dare to be Bold, there was some good stuff in there, but I made a few mistakes in the sense that I didn't know how to eloquently express myself, and because I didn't know how to eloquently express myself, there were points in there that were unfinished. And a lot of people don't know this, but I couldn't write back in. I mean, I could write. I wasn't illiterate. I read more than anybody else. So books have been my best friend for my entire life. You know, now when I travel, I pick up a book. It's the first thing that I do. I'm constantly. I must read every 5-10 minutes I get a chance. I'll pull a book out. If I'm sat in a, you know, waiting for somebody to come out of Tesco's, I have books in the car. I read books on my phone, constantly reading, and you'd think that you'd pay more attention to the construction of language, and I really didn't. And what happened was that because I left school at 14 and everything was maths based, and I worked as a carpenter, I worked there till I was about 16 years old, and then I met Zachary's mum, Sarah, and we moved in together, and I moved into her mum and dad's house, and they lived in a 2-bedroomed house. It was a little 2-bedroomed house, again on the ghetto. And at the time, I never really had a use for writing. I never really had a use for having to write. So it just sort of disappeared. It dwindled into nothing. And then I got to writing my first book about 2010, and that was with Kenton Nepper. And Kenton used to send the writing back and said, I can't read this. And so what I'd have to do is he'd say, break it into paragraphs. So I'd count 4 lines, and then I'd click like enter, and then 4 lines, and click enter and send it back. And in the end, Kenton had to write the book for me as I sat and wrote sentence by sentence for him to understand it. And that's why it took nearly 2 years for it to come out. And what Kenton really taught me is how to write. He took the time, you know, instead of, I love his philosophies on mentalism and everything else, but he took the time to teach me how to write, and he took the time to teach me how to start expressing myself. And after I'd got a little bit of a taste for what it was like to have somebody read my books on the other side of the world, I then sent Penguin Magic Dare to be Bold, and Penguin Magic sent it back and said, we don't like it, you know, it's shit. And I was like, right, you know, fair enough. And I went and released it anyway. There's some really nice ideas in there. I read back over it a few months back as I started to rewrite it, because I'm going to send it out to everybody for free, so that if everything does come to a finish, I can now express myself. But I want to clear one thing up. There's an entire section or a chapter in that book that's dedicated to instant stooging. Now, I don't instant stooge people. I don't need to. I have such a big toolbox that I can pluck different tools out at will like you said, collect the right tool for the right job, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that I find ultimately important. But I wanted to write about it because we're living in such a strange era right now that bad news travels a lot faster than good news. And now I want to express myself how I was supposed to express myself in that book, but I never managed to fully capture what it is that I meant to say. And that was just due to the fact that I were borderline illiterate, and I'm not anymore. So if I said to you, and I'm going to ask you an honest question, I want you to give me an honest answer. I'm going to ask you the same question again in a moment. And answer honestly. Don't worry about, you know, what my opinion is, because we all have our own opinions. Would you instant stooge something, Christoph?
I would not.
You would not, right? So now let me ask you this question. Let's imagine that you're in front of 1,000 people. You've built a piece of your act up for 5 minutes. It's paramount that this finishes up, right? It's about to get to the climax, the conclusion of the routine. The person forgets what they're supposed to remember. So they've typed in something on their phone, they've erased it out, they forget. You notice at the corner of your eye, somebody pulls a mobile phone out in the audience and starts to record the show. You have two choices. The next day you're going to be on Lad Bible. The awkward moment a magician messes up in front of 1,000 people and your career's dead, or you can instant stooge the one person on stage, and that one person's going to have a terrible show and is going to leave, but for the most part, the other 999 people and your career's intact. You know, you get on a speedboat and you have a life jacket and you feel a little bit safer about having that life jacket. You get on an aeroplane and there's life vests. You feel a little bit safer about it. Now, to me, I'd never ever recommend instant stooging. I'd never recommend stooging anybody. But I know that if I'm in that position where I have to choose between everything at the most important moment falling to shit or utilising that technique, I know what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And when you think about it like that, it's not so bad. It's not such a bad thing. And I wanted to teach people ways to do that just in case you ever found yourself in a situation. So let me give you an example of what I'd do in that situation, because we've all had it. We get into a situation, you've asked somebody to total something on the phone, or they picked a playing card, they put it back in the deck, and then right at the last minute, you say to them, what was your playing card? And they say, I've forgotten. We've all had that, right? So this is how you remedy that situation. It's very simple, and it's something that most people wouldn't even think about. But do you know how embarrassing it is for somebody to open their mouth in front of 999 people and say they've forgotten the playing card they picked out of the deck?
Sure.
It's highly embarrassing. So
yeah.
you're gonna alleviate both of yourselves from the situation, right? And if anything, you're doing them a favor. So what you do is you say, I'm going to teach you a memory technique to remember. Let's say it's a 4-digit number, the life equation 4034. I'm going to teach you a memory trick to remember what this number is. I'm going to teach how to go into your subconscious, extract that information and bring it into your conscious. But this is a tip that I charge for, so I'm not going to tell anybody else, right? And then you lean in and you say, just give me 5 seconds and I guarantee that you know what this piece of information is. And I lean in and whisper. And I say, we're both going to look like idiots if you do not remember what this piece of information is. So I have a solution that's going to get us both out of this situation. In a moment, I'm going to call a number out. And all I want you to do is say that that's the right number. Then I'll call another 3 digits out and you walk back to your seat and everybody will give you a round of applause. That means that you're going to look great because people will think you remembered it. And at the same time, people will think that I look great because I've managed to reveal it. So I'm going to ask you if you remember it, and I want you just to wait a little bit. And then after a few seconds, say, yeah, I remember it now. That's all I want you to do. Do you understand? They nod. I lean out. And I say, now just do what I've asked you to do. Run that through your head a few times. Do you know what the number is? And then they pause for a few seconds and you see them looking around and they go, yeah, I do now. Right?
Yeah.
Then you write down the first number and you turn it round and that's the first number. You say, I'm going to write the rest down. And if this is right, you return to your seat and everybody else will give you a round of applause. You write it down, you turn it round, you get your round of applause. Everybody else there gives you credit for being able to retrieve memories that are lost in the back of somebody's head. The person on stage no longer feels like an idiot and is not embarrassed in front of an entire audience of people. You get the round of applause, they get the round of applause. You don't end up on Lad Bible the next day and your career's still intact. Which is a silly little technique, but after years and years of finding that some people just struggle to retain information, or no matter what, like for example, there's some situations where it can be avoided. If they write something down, they can always refer back to it. The problem is, if somebody's picking a card from a deck and putting it back inside, it's no good trying to get them to retrieve that piece of information. So sometimes I feel even the most unsavory of techniques, it's worthwhile learning one or two of those techniques to save yourself, because you never know who's recording you, you never know what's going to be aired. Like you said earlier, with the entire internet watching you these days, it's always better to protect yourself. And I'm very honest about it. I'm very honest about, and I think once every year maybe I might have to utilize a technique like that. But out of the rest of the performances, I'd never ever jump to just doing that, because I think it's a technique that I don't like. I personally don't like it. But then again, if I were on a speedboat, I wouldn't want to use a life jacket unless I really needed to.
Sure.
So sometimes, and that's why I wanted to bring up, because that was a blemish in that book, and I think that people mistakenly thought that everything that I did were innocent stooging, or everything that I did were dual reality, because it were written and it were in that book. And the bit that I didn't know at the time is that hardly anybody reads the introduction to books, and I should have put what I wanted, the point that I wanted to express into the context instead of the pretext. And in the introduction, if you read back over it, it says these effects use very sparsely, intersperse them between the effects that you're already using. So for example, if it's a dual reality routine, maybe just use one of them in your set. Don't use 6 dual reality effects. Use maybe just one.
Well, can I ask you a question there?
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned that you feel the blemish in that book is people ended up thinking that you use dual reality and instant stooging. Do you think that in most people's minds those two things are equally bad? Because I've never heard of, and I'm not really in the world of mentalism as much, I'll be honest, but I've never heard of people looking down on dual reality.
Well, the reason that people look down on dual reality is because they're worried about the audience talking afterwards. And there's a difference between very good dual reality and very bad dual reality. Now, what people worry about, and it's the same with pre-show work, people worry that, for example, in a corporate environment, they're all going to talk afterwards and then they blow your secret. And so dual reality then gets lumped in as a technique that's considered a bad technique, and so does pre-show. But pre-show again can be killed so that there's no way they can talk about it afterwards. Dual reality, if it's done well, can be killed. PK touches is dual reality, but I think that's a great routine. If you've ever seen my variation of lift, I clean that up so that the participant talks afterwards, and it gives me an extra revelation, and there's no way they can talk after that moment. A good piece of dual reality ties itself back up in a way that nobody ever could talk about it afterwards. The problem is, with instant stooging is they always can talk about it. But the worst thing that anybody could say in the thing that I just offered you is the guy, I were going to look like an idiot on stage, and the guy actually saved me from looking like an idiot. That's the worst thing he could say. I've not. Yeah. There were a very, I don't know, do you know the 50-pound hypnosis story?
No.
So instant stooging goes back years and years and years. It's gone back since the start of this art form, but hypnotists came up with very clever ways to wrap up the instant stooging. So what a hypnotist would do is, if his show were failing, he'd then snap his fingers and get someone to close their eyes. He'd say, when I snap my fingers, I want you to close your eyes. And he'd do that whole gambit. And we're going back to, 80s bad hypnosis here.
Sure.
And then he'd lean in and whisper, and he'd say, listen, he goes, the show's going terribly. Everything is going to look ridiculously bad for me if you don't help me out. I promise you I'll give you 50 quid from my wage at the end if you just play along and do what I ask. I won't ask you to do anything stupid. If you're going to do it, just nod now. And the guy would nod, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then he'd do the entire show, and this guy would be doing amazing things based off of what the hypnotist had asked. And then right at the end of the show, he'd say, and when I snap my fingers, you're going to a deep sleep. And he'd snap his fingers. And he'd go, when I wake you up, you're going to be convinced I offered you £50 to play along tonight. So now we'd wake the guy up, and the guy would go, he did offer me £50 to play along, and the audience would go insane at that because it'd be one extra thing. And he goes, you'll tell everybody in the room that I offered you £50. And now when the guy went back into the audience and said, he offered me 50 quid to play along all night, nobody of course believes him because it's just a follow-on from the hypnosis that happened before it. Now that's a mixture of, say, dual reality and instant stooging. And that's where you put, and that, to me, that's a very clever clever way to use that technique. I just think that you shouldn't jump straight to that. And the moral of that story is the hypnotist waited till he could get nobody else under before he relied on that technique, and then he wrapped it up in a way that it couldn't be spoke about afterwards.
Right.
And that's what was so nice. He created a double bind. Dual reality sometimes doesn't do that. You know, dual reality sometimes lacks luster in the sense that it comes to the end of the routine and then there's this gaping hole for the participant. I have a routine that's, it's an any card at any number. It's the opening piece on the first Penguin lecture.
Right.
And you do this thing where you're touching the participant on the foot to cue them. And I use the word cue loosely because I'm going to tell you the language for that I use now in comparison to back then. They get an effect because they still think, how did that playing card that he told me to think of end up at the position of the number that were called out by somebody else? They get a card at number effect, whereas everybody else gets at any card at any number effect. But, you know, they can still go away and say, he told me what the card was, he told me what to think of. How did he do that? That's the next question the audience asks. Oh, he just pressed on my foot, and that'd be it, game over. Whereas if you just add a subtle line like this, I'm going to transmit to you a card in a moment so you know what card's inside my head, but I'm going to do this without saying a word so that nobody else in the room knows what it is. So I'm going to be telling you a card. So look at me. You're going to be using your feelings to pick up on this card, and that's how I'm going to transmit it. You understand? And they say, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I say, I'm openly telling you this, and I want everybody to know that I'm openly telling you what this card is, right? And now you build the card up, and you're saying, I'm going to transmit this card to you. They're not going to go back into the audience now and go, yeah, he told me a card at the start, or he transmitted a card to me, because it seems like you've said, I'm going to transmit this card to you without anybody else in the room knowing it, without saying a word. And it almost looks like that you've told the entire audience that that's happening, so they don't need to talk about it when they get off the stage.
Sure.
You know, and that's an example of how to tie up a dual reality to make it good or make it interesting. But I think that the reason that they're lumped together is because there are bad dual reality routines, but there's bad everything, you know. I'm going to tell you a story if you don't mind. And again, I'm going off on a tangent. I often do this. But let me tell you why dual reality, in my book, has always been something that's good if it's done right. And this is a genuinely true story. It's about my granddad.
Oh, I know this, but I'm sure most people don't, so please.
When I was a kid, my granddad used to take me and my cousins out onto the moors. So what had happened is that me and my brother were in this flat, and we'd have a little window that would look out, and we used to lift the blind up and peek out for my granddad to pull up in this little white Subaru, like an estate Subaru, one of the old ones. And my granddad were right into horses and stuff like that. So we'd get into the back of the car, and there'd always be this tartan cloth over the back, and you could always smell it used to have hay in the back of the car and sugar beet and all sorts. And we'd drive, and we'd always get excited. It was the best day ever when my granddad were going to pick us up, and he took us to my grandma's house. And my grandma would always be stood on the doorstep waiting for us to come in. She'd fuss over us, and we'd get into the house, and they'd make a little packed lunch. And I remember they'd take a loaf of bread, they'd take all the bread out of it, they'd make the sandwiches, and then load them back into it and screw it back up. And then we'd go pick my cousins up. That's if my cousins weren't already in the car when we'd get in. And then on the way over, we'd talk about, you know, facts, whatever else. But just before these visits took place to the moors and we'd go on these walks, my granddad would always have little jobs for us to do beforehand. So he'd be like, right, I want you to make sure that the Wellingtons are in the car, or to my brother, the grass needs cutting before we go. You know, tiny little jobs that kids do to make a little bit of pocket money. But he'd stop us halfway through these jobs, and he'd set us jobs at opposite ends of the yard or opposite ends of the house. And then he'd come over to me and he'd say, I want you to listen to me really carefully, mate. You're going to be the captain today. You're going to be in charge of all the other boys. And if anybody gets out of line, he says, I'm getting old now. I want you to just tell them. I want you to tell them that you're the boss and that they have to behave themselves. He goes, but I don't want them not feeling special. So don't say anything to them. Promise me. He goes, but if they do get out of line, you feel free to tell them. And I'd go on at moors, and they were always well behaved anyway. But I'd always go and know that my granddad wanted me to be the captain. He wanted me to be in charge of the rest of the boys, and give me this little surge of like feeling special. And years and years went by, you know, and never really thought anything of it. And my granddad started to lose his mind a little bit. He started to get really poorly. And one of the last visits that when we ever went to the moors, he wasn't as savvy as he used to be. and he'd been and told me, and I overheard him telling my brother. And I could have at that point thought, this is ruined for me now, knowing that he'd come up to me and he'd said, "You're the captain today. Don't get out of line. If don't say anything if nobody gets out of line." Then he said the same to my brother, and then he'd say the same to each one of my cousins. And every single one of us never told the other because we promised our granddad that we wouldn't. And because we were all waiting for somebody else to step out of line, nobody ever said to the other person, "I'm the captain. I'm in charge. You calm down." And if it weren't for my granddad losing his mind, I'd never have known that. And it was such a special moment, and it's still special to me. And I still haven't told my cousins, and I haven't told my brother. I've wrote about it. But I'll never forget that, because if anybody ever tells you that dual reality don't work in a close-up situation, my granddad proves beyond any shadow of a doubt that it does, and it can. And that was one of the most special moments in my entire life, based on difference and multiple realities existing at the same time. So yeah, so it can be good if it's done right. But I personally don't think it's a bad technique. I just think you've got to use it the same as any other technique. The problem with I think mentalists, and I'm using that as a blanket term, is the community's changed in 5 years. It's really, really changed in 5 years. There's been a massive shift, and everything's moved into a brand new direction. But years and years ago, you'd buy an act. So you'd buy an opening piece, then you'd buy a second piece, then you'd buy your third piece or middle, then you'd buy and there'd be 5 or 6 routines, and each one of these would be an entire act that you'd buy. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it's always been. If you ever go back to, for example, the True Mystery DVDs, or you look at any of Max Maven's DVDs, it's always been, you could use all of these effects together, and this would be an act. You're basically buying an act that you can take out and use. And that's a great thing. And I didn't ever want to write like that. I never wanted to write like that. And the reason that I never wanted to write like that, and the reason that I never wanted to film anything like that, is because I never really worked like that. I just decided, I have all these effects, I have all these ideas, which ones do I feel like doing? And that's not the best way for a stage show, but in close up, I think there's something so beautiful about knowing that every single performance that you're going to give is slightly different. There's something very artistic about it. There's something very beautiful about that. And, I'm taking that from the music world, that whenever, I know so many songs on the guitar. If I went to a gig, I might play certain songs one day, take requests, and then the next day play different songs. And I just wrote like that. And a lot of other people write like that also now. I'm not saying that I instigated that, because there were books obviously before they did that. But when I wrote the dual reality chapter and the instant stooging chapter, people took the book and I think mistakenly thought they were going to open it and have an entire act. And then what happens is when you open it and you go, well, the first piece is dual reality, the second piece is dual reality, the third piece is dual reality, the fourth piece is a piece of instant stooging, the fifth piece is a piece of instant stooging, the sixth piece is a dual reality piece. What you do is you just go, wow, all this guy does is dual reality, all this, and I don't blame anybody for thinking that, but that's not the case. So I want to categorically state that I'm very well versed in the classical techniques. I'm very well read. You can pretty much ask me about any piece of mentalism, and I can give you a way to perform it, a way to use it, a script, a presentation. I just wrote like that because it was a subject that nobody had talked about. There were very little about it to read about. I just wasn't smart enough at the time. I was naive, I was young to understand that that wasn't the way that you wrote books. It wasn't the way that you expressed yourself. And I'm glad times have changed to represent the fact that now you might just buy a book of ideas and you choose 3 or 4 of those and you use them at will.
Sure.
So sorry for going off for so long, but I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Well, that's all right. One of your trademarks is your storytelling, so I'm not going to stop you if you want to tell a story. But I do have questions if you want to get into those.
Yeah, of course.
So, in Vlog 3, and you do have a YouTube channel, there's a few vlogs on there. In Vlog 3 is titled The Real Me, and I was a bit surprised to see how much hypnosis was on there. And I'm not a hypnotist, I don't know much about it, so for all I know it could have been pseudo-hypnosis, but it seemed like hypnosis, and I was surprised to see how much of that constituted, your close up. I won't call it an act, but what you were doing. So my question is this: in the real world, the real me, how much hypnosis do you tend to do?
Well, I were a hypnotist before I were a mentalist. So, a lot of people don't know that. And I'm working recently with Keith Barry on some advertising. So I consult a hell of a lot. And because I consult, 98% of the hypnosis that's done on the set's down to me, 98% of the pre-show work.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned hypnosis at a very young age. I was doing hypnosis before it, and it wasn't great. I wasn't good at it. So, it wasn't something that there was a really weird change. And this is it. There's something so strange about hypnosis. It's so difficult to explain how it works. Hypnosis is 99% confidence and 1% skill. And that's just my opinion.
Sure.
Obviously somebody else will have better statistics. I haven't wrote about this stuff, and I've not just in my opinion that when I had more skill than I had chops, and at the age of about 30, I didn't steal a hypnosis book. I bought a hypnosis book at about 12, 13. And I stuffed it down my pants. I wrote about this as well in the hypno section of Masterclass series.
You stuffed it down your pants?
Yeah, well, so what happened was, it's a bit of a strange one, but I went out on one of my weekends out with my grandma and granddad, and I mentioned these quite a lot, but they were very inspirational people. And I told my grandma that I wanted to do hypnosis, and my grandma's response was that you shouldn't mess with stuff like that, it's dangerous, you shouldn't play with people's minds like that. Tell a 12-year-old boy that, and that just makes you want to do it more.
Right.
So we went to Haworth, and Haworth's one of these really weird towns. It's stuck in time, and all the villages around it have grown and become modernised. And as you walk into this place, it's like being in a time warp. There's still the old age crystal shops and the army shops and the underground bookstores, and it's all cobbled streets, and you can smell the cooking, the Yorkshire cooking coming out of the public houses. And me and my brother used to race to the top of the hill, and we raced to the top of the hill, and I bet in the book.
You cut out there.
Christoph, can you just text Alice until I'm in the middle of a recorded interview? So there's this really awesome story where, and it's true again, me and my brother came to Haworth, we'd been taken out on a day out, and we'd been to like a little fun fair, like a gala. Now my dad's a falconer, so he flies birds of prey, eagles, owls, and other bits like that. And my life's very contrasting in the sense that my mother's side of the family, which is, my mum left, but my mum's mum, we were very, very poor. So we had no money, and that was a lifestyle that we had to live. There were no way out of that. Mm-hmm. Whereas my dad's family were always all right. But he'd moved on and he'd got a new family. And because he'd got this new family, I'm not going to say that he didn't care about us, but I think that circumstance dictated the way that he acted. So, when we went to this little gala, there was this table stall, and you normally throw darts through the balloons to pop and land into the cards. And if you manage to hit one of the balloons with the balloons with the darts, tongue-tied, you manage to hit one of the balloons with the darts and it sticks into the card, then they give you the prize that's underneath that balloon. And the woman had forgot the balloons. So this woman sets up a stall, and then her husband comes to mind the stall, and they put this ornament with a playing card. They put down something else with a playing card, something else with a playing card, and then a stereo system. And my grandma really liked this ornament. So I went and I just riffle cut to the cards. I clocked where they were, culled them to the top of the deck, and I riffle cut. And I must have been really, about, 12, 13. I was very young. Might have been even younger. I might be tying two memories together here, I'm not sure. But on that same day out, me and my brother raced to the top of the hill. And at the top of the hill was this old bookstore. And I go into this bookstore, and I ask, is there any magic books? And she says, no, we don't have any magic books. I said, well, what about any hypnosis books? And she says, we might have a couple. And she pulls out the ABC of hypnosis. Now, this book was ancient. This probably predated me 4 times, so it was such an old book. And I asked her how much it was. She said 25 pence. And my brother at the back of the room said, I'm telling my grandma on you, you shouldn't be playing with stuff like that, what she told you. And I bribed my brother with £1. I said, I promise you I'll give you £1 if you don't tell. Please don't tell, and I'll give you £1. And she gave me the book. I took the wrapping off it, put the wrapping in the bin, and I took the book down my pants. And then I met back up with my grandma and granddad, and I spent the rest of the day with the book down my pants because I knew my grandma wouldn't let me take it home, or she wouldn't let me have it. She'd have thrown it in the bin. So I had it down my pants, and we got back. And I wrote, this is one line that I wrote in the book. I remember writing this because I sat for a good 5 minutes afterwards thinking about it. It's the only time ever that I've wanted to leave my grandma and granddad's house. It's the only time ever because I was so scared of getting caught. I wanted to leave. And I felt so rude after writing that because how much I miss my granddad. That, you know, I spent so much time regretting that one thing after writing it. And then I also finished it with that I never did give my brother the £1. And I genuinely, after writing that volume, rang my brother up and said, I owe you £1. And then I told my brother the story, and we had a bit of a laugh over it. But yeah, so it's that's how I got into hypnosis initially. I read this book, and it were a self-hypnosis book. So I used to try it on myself before I went to sleep, and I found that I'd have good, you know, I'd sleep well. And then after that, I took it out and trialed it with a few friends, managed to get them to feel dizzy and get their legs wobbling and whatever else, which is not a good thing to make somebody feel dizzy, but when you're not knowing what you're doing,
Sure.
that was that. And then I moved into mentalism. I pushed the hypnosis to the back of my mind. You know, I'd successfully, when I went camping, hypnotised a few people. It wasn't something that I were amazingly great at. And then I met a guy called Chris Lee. So this is long before I wrote any of the books. This might be 2008, maybe 2000. Yeah, probably 2008. And I would gig in bars at the time, 2009. And I would gig in as my band, and then I moved into gigging mentalism. And I'd seen Chris hypnotising people, and this girl asked once at one of the shows, "Oh, are you one of the hypnotists?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Could you do something for my boyfriend?" And I did something for the boyfriend, and he just went under straight away and did exactly what I asked. And I said to Chris, why did that work as well as it did? And he said to me, well, he said, the reason we put hypnotists on posters and the reason that we express that we're hypnotists and we have banners there is if people expect a hypnotist, the likeliness is that they're going to go under, or they're going to believe in your ability when they see you hypnotise somebody else. And it was that belief in what I did that made him go under. Now, at that moment, I had this relieved sense of confidence. And I used to cover Chris's shows as a hypnotist after that. And I used to go and I'd do full hypnosis shows, 4 hour long, 2 hour long hypnosis shows, and cover a lot of his shows. And I think in a year, I probably covered about 60 of his shows. You know, he was working that much and he would double book that much. So he just used to give them to me and say, you know, there's this amount of money in it if you go down and do this. Excuse me. And what happened was, I got so bored of doing this thing where they hold their hands together and this thing where they're doing this with their fingers. I got so bored of all of that I just decided I'm going to try this to see what happens just by trying it. And then I started to just say to people, you know, have you ever been hypnotized before? No. Put your hands together like this, push your fingers together. You're going to notice you can't take your fingers apart. And I just moved straight into it. And then I'd say to them, look, and after the fingers were stuck, I'd take the hands apart and say, look at me, you're going to go down in your sleep now, and that'd be it. And I'd just tell them what I wanted them to do. I'd direct them and tell them. And it had happened. And I got quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker at it. And now I don't even have people close their eyes. I don't do any of these suggestibility tests. I just literally either stick someone's hand on the table or tell them they can't speak. And that's it. I'm just very quick at it. The thing with there's 2 things going on in the video, the real me. And we'll talk a little bit more about the technique used later on, but the first bit where she lifts the pen off the table, or she can't lift the pen, and then the guy can't lift the pen, that's not hypnosis. But that enables me to segue into hypnosis, and when she can't say her name, or she can't remember the bus,
Sure.
the name of the bus, and he can't remember his own name, that is hypnosis. And sometimes you find that segueing from a non-hypnosis piece into a hypnosis piece is the route to take, because the suggestibility test is built into the visual to start with. So you've not got horrible 10 minutes of this, horrible 10 minutes of this, people clapping hands and jumping about like idiots on stage. You don't have none of that. You just have, here's a visual for everybody else to see. hypnosis happens within 20, 30 seconds, and then directly after that you move into the second piece of hypnosis, and there's been no bit that were boring or no dead time for the audience. So in that video there's that, and there's another piece of hypnosis where the guy says the PIN code to his bank as his name.
Yeah.
And that were inspired by a pizza. Excuse me, I'm choking. I'm so cold. That were how rude of me. That were inspired by a piece that I created for a French television show. So I was working on a documentary in France, and we were in right where the Louvre is. If you come back from the Louvre, there's like this area where it's just all it's almost like a dusty gravel type floor. And what we were doing is we were progressively performing things till we got into the Louvre, and we had permission in the Louvre to do some pickpocketing. So we did this amazing thing where we pickpocketed a guard in the Louvre, and during pickpocketing, at the end, the last line was, "I bet you'd be the sort of person that believes that you couldn't have something stolen from right underneath your own nose. Well, let me tell you, you can. Let's play back what happened, but instead of watching what's going on in the foreground, let's pay attention to what's going on in the background." And we had somebody stealing a painting off the wall in the Louvre right underneath the audience's nose that were watching it at home, and they were misdirected by us picking the pocket of the guard. So there was this really beautiful premise and setup. But one of the pieces that were in that documentary was you'd walk up to somebody and we'd talk about psychometry. The idea that if you hold on to somebody's objects, you can get a feel about that person and things from their life that there's no way that you could know. Mm-hmm. And again, you'll notice that when I'm talking in terms of my script, my character is very tight, whereas my actual me is not as scripted. It's very loose, it's very conversational. But yeah, so we're performing this psychometry routine. They take out the bank card, so we'd ask them what drives them, and they'd say money. It's okay. Have you got any notes on you? Can you take out your bank card? So they take the bank card out. I need to hold on to this for a few seconds. So they'd hold on to it for a few seconds with the performer. Then he'd put them to sleep, and he'd say, "I want you to imagine your feet are stuck to the floor. They're rooted firmly to the floor, stuck, welded, bonded solidly to the floor. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes, and when you open your eyes, you're going to imagine, for whatever reason, that the PIN code to your bank is your name. I'm going to ask you what your name is, and you're going to feel compelled to tell me the PIN code to your bank. Nod if you understand." So they nod, and that's them affirming that they've understood what it is that you're saying. So you say, "I'm going to count from 1 to 3 or 1 to 5, depending on who you are as a performer. 1, 2, 3, open your eyes." So so we're going to do a psychometry routine. Before we do, sorry, I forgot my name's, and then you'd say your name is, and then they'd say the PIN code to the bank, right?
Right.
And then the kicker would be, "Thank you for the bank card and the PIN code," and you'd walk off. But of course, you've put the suggestion in that they stuck to the floor. So now they can't chase after you, and you can see them trying to scramble after you, but they're stuck to the spot and they can't get after you. So this really beautiful little routine that tied itself back up. And I thought, I'm going to take an element of that and use it in my own work, because I still own the rights to those routines. And in the future, you'll probably see me using that somewhere. But yeah, so the hypnosis stuff I use heavily when I'm working on television shows, because I think that there's something great about it. And one thing that's really cool is using it in ways that nobody's ever imagined using it. So for example, let's say that you need an epic reaction for a piece of television magic. Mm-hmm. You need something incredible. You need just a moment that's going to be, this is the best reaction that I've ever seen on camera. You can hypnotize. Let's say somebody picks a playing card and you know you're never going to get a good reaction with this. You just know you're not. Let's say it's a 7 of clubs. You could say to somebody, and this is in pre-show, if I manage to guess your playing card, when I show you it, I turn it over. When I turn over that playing card, you're going to realise that I instantly become your favourite celebrity of all time. You're going to go absolutely crazy at the fact that you've managed to meet your favourite celebrity. But the one thing is, as your favourite celebrity, I don't want you to mention my name. It offends me greatly. So if the card's right when it gets turned over, you're going to react like crazy, because all of a sudden it's going to be your favourite celebrity holding that playing card. So now you have this beautiful moment where the card comes out of the deck. When the revelation of the playing card's turned round, that person's hypnotised to believe that you turn into their favourite celebrity, and the reactions are insane. So this using hypnosis in ways that you wouldn't have imagined using, and yeah, that's slightly cheating, but it's television. You're not stooging anybody. All you're doing is heightening the reaction. And another thing that's really cool sometimes, and this is not all the time, the great thing about hypnosis is, let's say you get into the middle of a routine and it's hypnosis based and something goes wrong. Let's say, for example, the person's not acted the way that you want them to act. The reaction's been a little bit flat. You can always make the person forget that they ever performed that routine in the first place and go right back to the beginning and just tell them that they're going to be more impressed the next time that they see it. So sometimes, hypnosis can be a really big aid when you're working on set. Hypnosis can be a really big aid when you're working on television. Now, I don't use those techniques like the reaction thing in my own performances, because I think sometimes an overt reaction like that, it just looks, to me, it looks fake, it looks horrendous, I don't like it. I prefer a more, gobsmacked reaction, but I take the elements of hypnosis sometimes and mix it into my work. And the honest answer is, to your question, Christoph, that I love to take skeptics and hypnotize skeptics. That's one of my favorite things. And there's no better way to prove that you can do what you say you can do than taking somebody who believes very little in what it is that you're doing and then changing the reality. And this happened the other day. For the first time in years and years and years, my dad's paid an interest in what it is I do. He loves knowing that I'm doing great. And I'm not going to name the television company, but I was sat in a meeting with a television company for my own television show. And the first meeting that we ever had, they assumed that I'd hacked the studio. The stuff that I got and picked up on everything just went right. It was just a great meeting. And they assumed that I'd hacked into the studio and somehow found out information about them and like their PIN codes to their phones and passwords to their computers. They assumed that I'd hacked it. And the next meeting, they wanted me to discuss the methods. So of course I'm in a difficult situation now, because the last thing that you want is them to have level peggings with you in terms of knowing how you do what you do. Mm-hmm. You just don't want it. It's just a nightmare. I found working with production companies that when they know what you're doing, they try to have more of an input into it, and you end up losing less artistic control. Anyway, we go back in this meeting, my dad comes in and he's sat in the chair, and they brought a hacker, and they brought somebody who was presenting a brand new hacking television show, a skeptic, and two other people that I'd never met, and literally turned around and said, do the same thing again. And I was like, well, if I'd have known you were going to challenge me, the first thing is I never ever respond to challenges. And I said that up front to him. I said, I just want you to know that by putting me in this position, I'm complimented, and I'm complimented because you believe that's the only way that I can achieve what I achieve. So then I literally moved into 3 or 4 pieces. 1 or 2 of them were propless because they were making the information up on the spot. They didn't know they were going to think of it. Quick propless pieces, banged that out, and it comes to the last piece, and I'm thinking to myself, I have to do something really incredible here. I have to do something so big that this is going to just win them over completely. Mm-hmm. And so I take this presenter, this famous presenter's hand, and I just instantly put her into a trance. Instantly. 2 seconds ago, she said she's more skeptical than anybody else. She couldn't say her own name. She couldn't move. And the great thing was that she starts to panic at this, right? Now, you've got to be really careful because you don't want to bring on an abreaction. But there's something so nice about finding that line where it starts to become a panic for them and they can't do it, and then bringing it back after a few seconds of them panicking, because there's that beautiful moment where they've gone from being so confident in the fact that there's no way you can do this, so confident that they know how everything's working, and their entire world crumbles in a second. And you get that beautiful contrast of them for a few moments, just struggling to understand that they can't control their own body, going back to an infantile stage where you can literally make them do whatever you want, and then bringing them out of it. And then just sitting back and watching everybody's faces, and everybody around the table were just gobsmacked. We got out of there, and my dad obviously knows hypnotists because my uncle were a magician, but that's another story for another time. My uncle was a magician, never helped me out, never cared, never interested in what I did. And his friend Tom is a very good hypnotist, a great Tom Penny, a brilliant hypnotist. And he's not the singer, he's not a singer, he's not the dancer, he's not the banjo player Tom Penny. Sure, and I'm not talking about Tom Petty. I'm talking about there's a banjo player called Tom Penny, but he's a hypnotist called Tom.
Peter, you cut out there.
Yeah, sorry, it's just, let me just readjust this.
No worries, I just want to make sure you know.
Yeah, it's because my phone rings, so I'm just on my phone at this moment in time. Let me just get back in position. You tell me when you can see me comfortably, Christoph.
I think the screen needs a second to catch up.
That better?
The screen is still catching up. I see your hands like this. You know, there's like a change in the frame every 5 seconds. I think it's catching up.
Yeah, well, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, sure.
It's just very slowly moving, so I'm just trying to be very careful with it because I don't want it to slide down.
Sure.
Yeah, so he knows hypnotism, and we got out of there, and he said to me, that's literally the best thing that I've ever seen. And, you know, I was like, well, and he was like, how did you know you could do that? And I was just like, well, I just do it. I don't think too much about it. And so, yeah, so I know it's a very long-winded way to answer your question. I promise I'll answer slightly more briefly for the next ones. But yeah, hypnosis does play an integral role in my performances. It plays an integral role in my television work, my consultancy work. It's, you know, it's just something that I've decided not to talk about it just yet. And there's a specific reason why I haven't talked about it just yet. It's because I'm a big believer in that you should only ever share a small percentage of yourself, and that's what I do. So, you know, you can over the rest of my life, then I'll learn more and I'll be able to express it more. And there's just people out there that are better at expressing how it works than me. If I wrote in a book, just go and have confidence in yourself and just believe you can do it and tell somebody that something's going to happen, it will happen. You know, I'm just at that stage that we're at with mentalism where I can't eloquently express myself in hypnosis. But now I feel I can express myself in mentalism, so all's good. Yeah, so that's it.
So I know you just said you can't eloquently express yourself, but I'm still going to ask this question in terms of hypnosis. You mentioned that there are people far better than you in hypnosis, and I don't see what separates a great hypnotist from a mediocre one. If all that it is a delineation in the level of confidence, then sure. But you know, between you and someone better than you, what would be the main difference there?
So you've got to understand that there's specific states that your brain goes through before it goes into hypnosis. Okay. And whether you know, and again, this is more talking therapy hypnosis, but you go through alpha, beta, and then you've got your gamma states, and then you've got to understand your rapid eye movements, and then you've got to be able to express yourself about abreactions and how to deal with abreactions, and then you've got to talk about whether you're cold-sling a suggestibility test or not. And what I mean in terms of they can express themselves in writing and on video a lot better than I can. You know, for me, I'm not necessarily to say that they're better hypnotists, because I believe that we're all as good as each other. We all have something that makes us special. And I think there's a really interesting Einstein quote that outlines this. That if you judge a fish based on if you judge a fish's intellectual qualities based on its ability to climb a tree, it's always going to seem unintelligent.
Yeah. And
it's the same in hypnosis. You know, Anthony Jacquin is one of the greatest hypnotists of all time. What I really love about Anthony Jacquin is that just some of the ideas that he comes up with and the concepts and the way that he utilizes those concepts and the way that he'll think about when I'm creating a mentalism routine. So I'll create two contrasts between the two. So let's say I'm creating a mentalism routine, and you said to me, I want you to create. You give me a premise. You give me any premise you want. So it could be a book test, a word revelation, whatever you want. Doesn't matter.
Sorry. I was reading of the next question, but can you just read back the last sentence?
Yeah. So you give me like a premise in mentalism. You know, like a word revelation. You know, like a prediction or a book test or whatever.
How about a zodiac sign reading?
A zodiac sign reading. So this is it. So when I think to myself, I'm going to create a zodiac reading. Zodiac readings are fairly easy. You know, I look at it this way. How am I going to reveal? Let's say it's a big premise, and I get as much of a budget as I want. I sit and think to myself, right? What's important about a zodiac sign? So characteristics are one thing. So we can tell somebody's characteristics based on that. We can look at specific stars. We can tie stuff to specific stars. And all I'm doing is just creating in my head now as you see it. You see me think out loud. Mm-hmm. So I think to myself, right, I want to create a piece of mentalism wherein somebody's decisions are going to tell me their zodiac sign. Now, the revelation is fairly small and flat in this arena because it's only 1 in 12. But what I might say to myself is, right, I'm going to put somebody in 3 life 3 situations where their life's going to be in danger. And each of those situations are going to be based on their element sign, which half of the year they were born in, and their zodiac sign. So let's say there's 3 people there, and I say so 4 people. The first thing is you're earth, you're air, you're fire, and you're water. Only one of these people does something positive. So, for example, that person will walk you to the next phase. One of them's got a gun, the other one's got a knife, the other one's got a rope. I walk you towards them, and I point out that and I have to, based on your element sign, give the right weapon to the right person, and only one of them is going to be able to save it. This is just a ridiculous example, but bear with me, because at the end
Sure,
this will sound great.
Sure.
Right? So, and I'm just creating in my head now based on something silly, but at the end this will seem really, really cool. So now I ask you what your element sign is. So you approach that person. Let's see what would have happened if you'd have gone with any of these. And one person shoots something, the other person stabs something, and the other person hangs something. Right? Now we move on to the next step, and we repeat it right down till you get to your element sign. And you say, well, it was truly based on your characteristics that led me to knowing which path you take. Let's say you set up a big assault course, and them defining factors were going to be your zodiac sign. Now the zodiac sign's a little bit small, so let's expand a little bit upon that, because I think that it's nothing to do with what you said. But let's say it was a word revelation. Just an example. So let's say that I'm sat at a table with 4 eggheads. Now, for people outside the UK that don't know what eggheads are quiz champions. They're wordsmiths. They're repeatedly on the BBC for their ability to be able to beat anybody at general knowledge, creating words that nobody could ever think up. And all 4 of these people are sat and told that they'll each get £1,000 if they can come up with a word that I couldn't have predicted in advance. So let's say it's Charlotte, Eric, Lucy, and Lauren. Charlotte, in a moment you're going to create a word up. You're going to confer with Eric, Lucy, and Lauren. You're all going to get to change your minds for 30 seconds. I'm going to give you a check before we begin. This is a check for £4,000. That's £1,000 each. If you come up with a word that I've not predicted, put that straight into your pocket. They confer for 30 seconds. After the 30 seconds, I say to them, what word have you arrived at? And they say, sell. And I say, okay, so like selling an object or selling an item. And they say, no, like a blood cell. I say, so C-E-L-L. And I say, can I ask you how you arrived at that word? And they said that first they were going to go for a long word, and then they changed their mind and went for something a bit shorter. And then they bounced around shorter words. Then they went for something that were a short word but were fairly obscure, and then they ended up at the end all agreeing on the word sell. I said, okay, well, I'm going to be honest. I didn't get that, and you unroll the word that you think it is, and you've gone for anti-establishmentarianism. Mm-hmm. And they're all reveling at the fact that they beat you. And you say, can you show the camera your prize? And they open the check out, and then printed largely in black letters across the check is the word sell, that they've had in the pocket the entire time since before they ever started conferring. And you let them react for a few seconds, and that reaction dies down. And you say, Charlotte, Eric, Laura, Lucy, you each played a small part in coming up with that word, but in more ways than you'd ever know. If you take the first letter of each of your names, what does it spell? And the first letter of each of the names also spells the word sell. That's a massive revelation that's personal. And it was decided for before they ever started conferring on words, and coincidentally they ended up on that word that were written on the check that were inside the pocket the entire time, right? Mm-hmm. That's a big premise packed into it packs a punch.
Right.
I think about mentalism that way. When you ask me to think about hypnosis, I only think of it on a small scale, because I think about, right, okay, so I can stick somebody to the floor. What's interesting about that? But if you take a look at Darren and his writers, they stuck somebody in the middle of a zebra crossing so that the cars couldn't get past, and then the traffic builds up and everybody's beeping and people are trying to pull them across the road. And they take something that's so small and they manage to create a premise that's so big and interesting. I lack, and maybe this is just something that's my own hurdle, but I think that I lack the capacity to be able to do justice creating hypno routines, because I don't bill myself as a hypnotist.
Right.
So whereas Anthony Jacquin, you'll say to him, right, what are we going to do? So Anthony Jacquin, if you just check out his, there's this thing that he does where Hypno Survival, I think it's called. And he's at a market, it's the best piece of hypnosis I've ever seen. He's at a market stall, and there's a fruit and veg salesman. Mm-hmm. And this fruit and veg salesman's stood there, and he says, Phil, and he goes, I want you to look at me, Phil. And he goes, how much for this? And he picks up a cucumber. And the guy's like, oh, 35 pence or whatever. And he puts the guy to sleep. But Anthony's a really small guy. So Anthony realizes that he can't reach him to pull his head forwards. So what does he do? He grabs hold of the back of the guy's head with a cucumber and then pulls it down. Right? So he's pulling this guy's head with a cucumber. And it just looks so peculiar, but it's so good. And he says to him, in a moment, you're going to open your eyes and you're going to understand that this is the world's strongest marijuana. There's already a lit joint and you're going to take it and you're going to smoke from it. And this guy gets high smoking a cucumber on his own stall, right? But the whole idea of the show is about hypno-survival. So then Anthony says, these vegetables, he goes, they're all drugs. And he goes, when I snap my fingers, you're going to imagine the drug squad are coming and you're going to try to hide the drugs. And he snaps his fingers and he lifts up a bag and he goes, quickly, load them into the bag, Phil, what are you doing? The guy starts to throw vegetables into this bag. Anthony Jacquin runs off with the bag and hides round the corner. The camera then follows him round and he says, well, I think I got a good haul there of vegetables. It didn't cost me a penny. And he goes, look over, Phil's none the wiser. And there's just a beautiful moment of the narrative that runs through it being so perfect and elegant that regardless of what your opinions are on, on drugs or whatever else, forget that for a few seconds, put your prejudice aside, and focus on the narrative that runs through that, how he managed to take something that's considered wrong, hypnotize the person like it's right, then say to the person, you know it's wrong, now you're going to be punished unless all this stuff goes in this bag. And then the end is the thing that he wanted in the first place, to get a bag of vegetables. And the route that he took to get there was such an interesting route, and the narrative was so interesting that what he did is he took something that he knows is an unsavory or controversial subject, utilize that controversial subject, which is going to gain the views. After utilizing that controversial subject, and the person should have known better, uses that should have known better to achieve his objective at the end, which were to get the vegetables. And I think that's such a clever way to create a premise. And with mentalism, I can do that all day long because that's all I do all day long.
Yeah.
Whereas with hypnosis, I think it'd take me some time to be able to even compare myself to Anthony Jacquin in terms of being able to do that. Now, hypnotizing people, I might be able to hypnotize people faster than Anthony. I don't know. I might be able to real-time perform better than Anthony. I don't know. I don't consider myself a better performer than Anthony because I don't think in terms of competition. I don't think in terms of... I just think I'm doing what I do. There's things about everybody that I love, and I take those elements of the things I love, I incorporate them into my own world and my own work, and I don't really care about anything else. But yeah, so to answer your question, I think, in all honesty, because they can express themselves better than me and they can create better premises, and it might just be that I'm just not confident in that area, I'm just not confident in being, and I'm very honest. You'll find you can ask me anything, Christoph, and I'll be very honest about it. I just feel that I'm not as confident in that area as I am in my mentalism, and that's why I don't write about it, and that's why I don't talk about it. But that's not to say that, in 12 months' time, when I've got over this hurdle, that when the floodgates come down, that I've got over 10 years doing it. So, it's something I can talk about, and there's little subtleties and techniques and principles that I've got that I've hidden back and I've kept for myself, and maybe one day they'll see the light of day, I don't know.
Sure hope so. So